We power hope. We power dreams. We power life. But there's one power we all have. The power to make a difference. The power to vote. Entergy, the power of people.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney.
And I'm Charles Zewe. Tonight on Public Square, we turn to one of the most serious problems confronting Louisiana, poverty.
For a long time, Louisiana has had one of the highest, if not the highest, poverty rate in the country. Instead of getting better, however, census figures show the state's poverty rolls are growing, especially in rural areas. Consider this Census Bureau map. Dark green areas indicate up to 36% of families in these parishes live in poverty. These areas include the Delta parishes of East Carroll, Madison, and Tinsall, along with Red River, just south of Shreveport, and Evangeline Parish in central Louisiana. The map also shows, however, that poverty is a statewide problem. In parishes colored medium green, up to 25% of families live in poverty. In light green parishes, up to 20% of families are poor. Being poor in Louisiana can mean having to dig through trash, collecting cans to pay for your next meal. It can also mean living in rundown housing and having few, if any, chances of getting a job. Ann Williamson is Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Social Services.
In the Department of Social Services, we administer over $800 million in assistance annually. These are through programs such as the Food Stamp Assistance Program, the Child Care Assistance Program, and CASH. The reality of the fact is that the majority of adults who receive these services are low-income, working parents who want to provide for their families. The tragedy is that their wages are not to a level that they can indeed be self-sufficient and not have to rely on the state for resources.
The numbers are grim. 17% of Louisiana residents, 1 in 6 people, live in poverty, the 4th highest rate in the nation. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates 882,000 Louisiana residents have annual incomes below the federal poverty threshold, while the median household income in Louisiana is $34,307, 47th lowest in the country. More than 40% of state residents make less than $25,000 a year. That's because while more than 70% of the poor people in Louisiana work, many earn the minimum wage of $5.15 an hour, meaning they earn just over $10,000 a year. As a result, the poor increasingly are turning to faith-based charities for help. The Reverend Jeff, Executive Director of the Greater Baton Rouge Federation of Churches and Synagogues, runs the Holy Grill, a soup kitchen in Baton Rouge.
I'm seeing an increase in numbers and needs of people who are requiring not just food, but also other kinds of help as well. Help with prescriptions, help with rent, help with energy bills, help with buying the clothes that they need, medical care and things like that. So food that we work with here is just one of those kinds of ways that we try to meet some of those increasing needs.
The Council for a Better Louisiana describes poverty as a serious threat to the future of the state. CABL President Barry Erwin contends poverty is the root cause of other social ills, such as poor education, poor health, and high crime.
All of these issues affect us in a lot of ways that we don't think about. It could be just what we're paying in taxes for health care. It could be in what we're paying in taxes for public safety. It could be in what we're paying for taxes in education. It could be the way that we lose potential economic development and job growth because of some of these other issues that are affected by poverty. I'm afraid sometimes we don't think about those enough and that we don't really connect those dots. But really, I think we're all affected by it, and because of that, I think we all have a responsibility to deal with it and address it.
At Broadmoor Elementary in Baton Rouge, Principal Larry Harris sees the impact of poverty on students who live in a high crime area where depression, drug use, and domestic violence are commonplace.
When the students come to us, nobody knows what they've seen the night before. I have, this exaggerate, but I have, 8-year-old students that are 40 years old.
And Harris adds, living in destitution teaches lessons in survival that are hard to undo.
How do you educate? How do you tell them that education is more valuable than going out and making $200 or $300 a day when you're 12 years old?
A big part of the problem is that the face of poverty in Louisiana and nationally has changed over the last 30 years, from that of a two-parent family to that of a single mother struggling to work while raising a family. In New Orleans alone, there are an estimated 26,000 poor families, many of them single-parent families. Federal officials point out the poor are more and more African American, young, increasingly female, and progressively more rural. In the Delta region, for instance, 40% of the residents of East Carroll Parish live in poverty. In nearby Madison and Tenshaw parishes, the poverty rate is about 30%. Gwendolyn Knockum lives in a rented two-bedroom mobile home near Donaldsonville with 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren, 2 of whom, she says, are disabled.
I get more finances than I can move.
She depends on meager welfare payments, which often force her to make choices.
My rent is $250. My water exceeds sometimes $100 and some, and my light bill like $100 and some. My sewage like $84 or $74. And then I have to buy household stuff. Like right now, I had to miss a month of paying rent to buy some hygiene stuff and a few clothes.
What should be done to combat poverty? At a 2-day anti-poverty summit in Monroe, Governor Kathleen Blanco urged employers and workers to take advantage of workforce training programs. Initiatives which promote partnerships between government and private industry, according to some, can empower the indigent by creating opportunities that help poor people to do for themselves.
In the Department of Social Services, we recognize the need to not only work within government in terms of partners with the Department of Labor and the Department of Education, but also to branch into the corporate sector through provisions of quality child care assistance in the workplace for parents so that their children can be there and they can become dependable employees. We also believe that in order for our parents to become skilled employees, they need on-the-job training, and we want to partner with our corporate community to provide those opportunities.
State officials say a major step in tackling poverty should be the adoption of a long-term game plan that lifts people out of poverty by investing in education and economic development. CABL's Barry Erwin says people's income levels won't rise until they become better educated.
If we had done a better job of educating our people much earlier on, I don't think we would have the poverty we have right now. I think when you look at the data and see that we are very high in poverty and very low in educational attainment, that's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that those numbers, track each other that way. So, I think for the long-term piece, we've really got to fundamentally say we are going to educate our people.
Our audience tonight was selected scientifically using random digit dialing by LSU's Public Policy Research Lab. As always, our participants were polled on their attitudes tonight about poverty when they were recruited to take part. And here's just some of what they told us. A surprising 95% cited single parenting as either a major or a minor cause of poverty. Second was a lack of motivation, cited by more than 87% of participants. Nearly 2/3 agree that state government programs that try to improve the conditions of poor people are making things better. And in these days of a national debate over morality, 88% said a decline in morals is a cause of poverty. Finally, in our state, with its long history of education problems, more than 93% singled out poor public schools as a root cause of our poverty. With that, let's ask our audience why they think so many people in Louisiana are poor. But before we get to that, I want to introduce you to a lady named Marie Hebert, who before we came into the studio tonight told her own personal story. And I want you to hear what she said, because it is emotional and it goes right to the heart of what we're talking about tonight. Marie, if you would, please tell us your story.
Hello everyone. I have been a single mom since '97, mother of 4 kids. It has been a struggle because I don't have my high school education or a GED. I have been working just to try and make ends meet to supply for my kids. If it wouldn't have been for a friend of mine telling me to check with Catholic dioceses, I would have probably had my utilities cut off several times and had a hard time with rent, and by now would have lost everything, the little bit of stuff I did have that I succeeded at getting from my divorce. So it has been really a struggle for us.
Tell us about the month-to-month struggle. How hard is it for you? What do you go through to care for your family?
Like on the video, I can understand where the mother's coming from, because sometimes you have to decide, well, which bill am I going to let lapse this month just so I can put food on the table for the kids. It's really been hard. And when you get hurt and you're laid off, which I have been out of work since November 8th, it even makes it harder because you don't know where the money's going to come from.
And I'm not trying to pry into your personal background, but what was the thing that turned you and plunged you into poverty?
A divorce. I was married for 23 years, thought I had found the man of my dreams, and he just up and walked out on the 4 kids and I after 23 years. So we went from roughly an income of being $130,000 roughly a year down to $10,000 a year with 4 kids.
There you have the problem. I mean, a single parent, 4 kids to raise, bills to pay. So, why are people poor? I mean, we hear from Marie right here. What do you think? Let me hear what you think. Who wants to be first? Mary?
There are a lot of things that are running through my mind, and I'm sorry for your situation. As a public school educator for 20 years, the thought of making over $100,000 a year and then going down to that level has to be difficult. My concern is, and I certainly believe in helping people that need help on a temporary basis. I don't think we're being tough enough in Louisiana. I don't mean to seem insensitive, because I'm not. I wouldn't be in public education if I didn't care about people. But I think what we're doing in an attempt to implement a program to help people, I'm not sure about the long-term plan. I'm not sure what our vision is for lifting them out of poverty, rather than the perspective that I get from my students that they don't have to finish school. They don't have to get a job, because they know that ultimately someone else will take care of them.
I look at things differently, more from a root cause analysis, if you will. Louisiana, for many years, was a very wealthy state in terms of natural resources, but few employment opportunities with what we think of as kind of corporate employers, if you will. Many people hunted, many people fished. With that sort of a cultural background, there was not a lot of emphasis on education. And, you know, if you look at the history of Louisiana, you know, prior to the war, World War II, let's say, for instance, you know, people could survive, whether it was, you know, living off the land agriculturally, because we were basically an agricultural state, or hunting, fishing, farming, et cetera, et cetera. After World War II, kind of society changed. A lot of people came back from the war. There was huge economic boom, particularly in our state. And then as you move to the 60s, that kind of moved forward with economic development, with chemical plants coming to our state. And then we had a very bifurcated society and economy. You had people who had great jobs in industry, and you still had a lot of people who had very limited education, and not just limited education, but low valuation of education. You know, Daddy always got by without being able to read or write. I'll be able to get by without reading and writing. So you have a limited number of people who had value in education and went forth and did that, had good jobs. And then we had many people who had very limited access to education and very poor schools. And then when we put pressure on children coming up in the 60s and the 70s to get an education, when you have children whose parents failed out of an education system, they have no faith nor value that the system will do right for their children, because the system didn't do right for them.
Are you also a teacher?
I am not a teacher.
You're doing a great presentation. Like there's teaching in your background.
Well, I've been very involved from an industrial perspective on working with how do you get appropriate workers for technical jobs. And you know, people have to have a certain level of educational accomplishment to show up for work on time, to be able to do the calculations, to be able to do whatever it is that's involved with the job. But you know, we sort of have a systemic problem that people who were left out of the educational system, and I look at it very clearly at that, you know, very late 1940s, 1950s, there was a black education system, there was a white education system, agricultural systems still worked because, you know, people hadn't left the farm yet, but then when you hit the 60s, the small towns shut down, you know.
Pastor Johnson, I see you nodding, and there's something on your mind back there.
Certainly. You know, I'm very happy to be here tonight, and we've talked about a lot of things in terms of systems and programs, but I think the dear lady mentioned that when the husband left out, there was the problem. They went from 130,000 down to 10,000. So I think that the man should not be allowed to leave that situation. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier is moral failure. And so morally speaking, when a person doesn't take care of their own, they're worse than an infidel. So the man should not be allowed. I think we should hold some of the deadbeat dads accountable and remove some of the burden from these mothers that are struggling.
Who else? What do you think of that, Linda?
Well, I am also a single parent, and I have 2 kids. And I think one cause of poverty is because of the education, you know. Like she said, she didn't have an education and stuff, you know, but I did. I'm not making that much money, but I get by, you know, as a single parent. But a lot of kids I hear, they're not striving to do good in school, and they keep on falling by the wayside. And therefore, when they become a grown up, there's nothing for them to hold on to. So they have to go in poverty because the jobs they require education, a diploma, you know. And now you have to go even go far as to go to college and everything. And so a lot of kids is losing out because they don't have an education and everything. And another thing, being single. That's one of the reasons too that poverty is in Louisiana, and there's something just need to be done about it. I guess we're gonna come to a conclusion and try to get something going.
What's your answer?
My answer is for the kids and even for her, go back to school, try to get in a field that's, you know, that she comfortable with, and the kids need to stay in school, and mostly black kids. They are constantly falling by the wayside. They don't have, the parents is falling, and therefore the kids, they don't feel a need to go on and strive on and everything. So I think they need to stay in school, and like the pastor said, you know, when the husband leave, he have to break the wife off something.
But I think it's deeper than that. I mean, staying in school is one thing, but if you don't have a family structure that can support that child learning, that child is in, I mean, he or she is behind the 8 ball from the get-go. I mean, you have to have a structure, you have to have a system, you have to have people who know enough to help that child.
Yes.
And so it's not just say stay in school. I mean, what good does that do if they don't have a way to stay in school?
Let's hear real quick from everybody else. Parry first, and we're going to try to go around to everybody, and we're going to say one lady for last because I want to hear what she says last.
One of the aspects I think of kids' motivation and education is I don't think they see a future tied to going to school. I think they feel like they go to school to basically earn an attendance certificate, not necessarily to learn a trade or to become an expert at something. I think our education system needs to somehow provide an opportunity that they know will tie directly to success in the future if they apply themselves, more than just they need to be in school.
Ed, how about you?
You hit on something I believe that was very important. That kids, I think, need to be taught more than just their ABCs and the arithmetic. They need to be taught a goal orientation, the possibility of being someone and getting somewhere. And frankly, I think school should be a place that kids would want to go to. You know, affable place where they don't have fights, where and I know it may sound radical, but there are free lunches for certain children that are indigent, but then why not have good free lunches for all the children?
Paula, how about you?
Things that I'm thinking about, making fathers support their children, but like Betsy said, you have to have a literate family and someone that knows what to do. And I'm thinking about Miss Abear. If she has to go to work, who's going to watch the kids? What's going to happen when the kids get off from school and they're just by themselves, or either, you know, with someone who's not helping with their homework? I think we need to really invest in early childhood education programs and put it there, because if you invest in the economy and you have the jobs, but yet your people can't fill the jobs, you're going to have people from out of state to come in and fill higher paying jobs. That's going to, you know.
Tim, what do you think?
Well, I mean, everybody's touching on the same things I'm thinking about. I think the first thing is, you know, about the fathers being held accountable. I don't believe the state is doing a very good job in holding those fathers accountable. And I know of a situation where there's a single mother that is not getting any help from the father. And the only thing he has to do is say that he's making, you know, he does not have any income. He has a job that's paying him cash. So there's really nothing she can do, and she's struggling to support these two children. And, you know, he's nowhere in the picture. And I think as far as the education, I agree. I think we need to, you know, there are some kids that probably aren't geared to go to college. But I think we need to really emphasize our trade schools and trade programs and develop those jobs that are still, you know, very high paying jobs. And even in the public sector and other industries that are needed for low paying jobs, I think something has to be done to get those wages up.
Let's come to this side of the table. Tommy, how about you? You've been sitting over here very quiet.
I did a lot of research before I came here, looked on the internet, went to the library. Everything points to education. Yet in my own experience, that's not true. My son, Chris, came to me when he was a senior in high school and said, I don't want to go to school anymore. I want to get a GED and quit here. I'm just wasting my time. I want to go to LSU. I don't know how he talked me into it, but Chris has a good way of talking people into things, and I said, sure, go ahead. So I'm not sure he ever attended a class at LSU. I think he went there and went to the games and went to a party, and he was out of there in no time at all. He tried again to go to Southeastern, starting over again and pretending that he had never gone to school, and the same thing happened at Southeastern. In the meantime, he was constantly in fights and trouble. And then one day, he just decided he needed to earn a living. And he went into an internet business at a time when it was very young and nobody knew anything about it. And he's turning out to make gobs and gobs and gobs of money. He has about 12 or 14 people who work for him. He just recently came back from a month's vacation in Southeast Asia. And one of the things I remember about this, though, was that when he bought his new Jaguar, I saw a scrapbook in his room that he had left when he moved out. And I opened it up, and in there was pictures of a Lamborghini, picture of a, what's your son's name? Ferrari, and there next, the third picture was a picture of a silver Jaguar, just like the one that he bought. So that had been on his mind from the time that he was a youngster, 13 years old.
So your point is he pulled himself up by his own devices.
They were talking about having goals. Maybe that was his goal. I don't know how he did it. But it wasn't through education. I know that. And it wasn't through, it was on determination on his part, and it was his willingness to take a risk at the right time. I don't think it would work for everybody, but it didn't apply in his case. And I have trouble making those things mesh. That's what I'm saying.
So what's your answer to poverty in this state?
Well, you know, that's the problem. I don't have an answer. I know I have questions,
and
maybe that's the beginning.
One of the great questions.
Maybe that's one of the beginnings, is that you have to have questions. I can also point to my brother, who did extraordinarily well, and he never learned how to read when he was in high school. And he ended up with a business that hired 40 people and has done extraordinarily well. So I just don't know the answer, but I know that in my particular case, I have two examples where it wasn't education, it was something else. I don't know what that something else is.
Betty, what do you think? How do you see things?
I see things where the children, like in the trailer, should be taught, and all children, to be the best you can be, regardless if it's sweeping streets, if you're an engineer, no matter what, because some people have a mentality that is average, that cannot do the engineer's work. But whatever you do, to grow up thinking that you can be, that you want to be the best that you can be. And I think with proper nutrition, so that these children will be able to grow and their brains nourished properly. And the education is a must, but it needs to be where it's appropriate for these children, where they can learn, and must be started, I think, at a very early age.
Let me try to move the discussion, and I want to hear from everybody else we haven't heard from, but just consider what's the role of government here? What's the role of faith-based providers, like the Reverend back there? I'm sure your church is involved in something. But how about you, Margot?
I come here primarily from a nursing standpoint, and correctional nursing is my background. And what I hear from each of you and Miss Hebert is so true of the depression I see every day. When you have, 8-year-old children coming in who've been with their, now this is a not a worst case scenario, but kids play, the mother is trying to go out and make a living, the kids are at home, and an 8-year-old comes in and has put his little brother in the dryer, and it's just, these people have, single parents today have insurmountable problems. And at 8 years old, when you try to talk to them about education, what you're going to do with your life, and they're already turned on to, why should I go out and try to make a living when I can sell drugs on the street corner?
So what do you do about that?
Got me. I don't know.
Rose, you have
what
the answer?
do you do?
Well, from my past experience, I'm not that old, but I am somewhat experienced. I've talked with single parents. I've talked with them, and they've told me how they wanted to work, they wanted to provide for their families, but there was always a nosy neighbor somewhere around who, when they left, when they would leave to go to work, they would call the Department of Social Services to report that these kids are at home by themselves, so they had to quit their jobs. And I've had some parents who've talked to me and said, oh, well, I want to get my GED. I want to do better for myself. But where do I go? Who's going to keep my kids whenever I go to this training? There's nobody there to keep the kids. So what happens? The kids are stuck back being frustrated because they're not succeeding in school. There's no one there to help them whenever they get home from school with their homework, like we mentioned earlier. So, and we have this No Child Left Behind. Every child should be reading once they reach third grade level, on level. I'm not seeing that very often in the school system. Therefore, the kids' frustration comes up again. They start fights, just really acting out because they want to do good, but they just don't know how to attain that. So as far as the answer to this poverty situation, I think that there needs to be more governmental programs out there to care for the kids whenever the parents want to go out and find jobs to work. when they want to go out, try to get their GEDs. I think that.
Let me hear from Linda and Kelly, because we're rapidly running out of time for the first part of the program. Linda, why don't you go first?
Well, I was just listening to what Rose said and others, and I think there needs to be more support among groups such as the church and other groups in communities to help families.
Yes.
And there needs to be a stronger family support among family groups. I think it starts with the families.
Kelly?
Oh, I agree. An attitude is changing the attitudes of people is going to help solve a lot of situations. But I do believe in the faith-based charity, whether it's time or money. There's a lot of people that want to give their time.
I want to introduce you very quickly to Renee Connelly, who is the president of Energy of Louisiana, and people look to business in this state for a lot of the answers here. Ms. Connelly, what is business not doing?
Well, it's interesting. We have spent a lot of time over the last several years trying to understand this issue as a utility. We impact everybody's lives. We're involved all across the state, and we've tried to partner with advocacy and say, what can we do? How can we come up with a solution? And I think that it's a business issue. It's not, if we could get people to think about poverty as a business issue, that it's not charity work.
And we're going to hear more about that as we continue. That, unfortunately, is all the time we have for the first part of our discussion. When we come back, we'll be joined by Governor Kathleen Blanco, Louisiana Secretary of Labor, and the leader of a group that's trying to do exactly what Mrs. Connelly is talking about, getting businesses involved in helping poor people help themselves.
While I was growing up, I always wanted to be an American. I didn't really quite know what that meant. I'm a sansei, which is Japanese for third generation in this country. I grew up in the Portland, Oregon area in a predominantly Caucasian community. And so I felt always a little different because I looked a little different. When I saw the Civil War series on PBS, the realization of what it is to be an American crystallized in my mind, and it has nothing to do with how you look. It's more the values that you absorb by being raised in the American culture and society. I realized that the Civil War, the event itself, shaped American society and culture. And I grew up in the American culture and experience. So in reality, it is my history too. After viewing Ken Burns' Civil War, I suddenly realized that all these years, I always was an American.
You're invited to Louisiana Public Square, right in the center of our state's political landscape. It's where everyday citizens gather to share opinions, feelings, and most importantly, questions about the things that really matter in our lives: economic development, education, healthcare, taxes. All the issues that thinking citizens just like you want to know more about. Join us in a conversation where everything's on the table and on the square. Louisiana Public Square. February's topic, Louisiana Lifestyles. Is the good life killing us?
As we continue here on Louisiana Public Square, tonight's topic, poverty, we're joined by Governor Kathleen Blanco, John Warner Smith, who's the Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Labor, and Lorna Bourg, who is Director of the Southern Mutual Help Association. Governor and Secretary, welcome, Ms. Bourg. Thank you very much for being with us. Who has the first question for the Governor? Or for everybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I want to start where we left off. I think a lot of our conversation begs a fundamental question. Why do we have single parents? I understand the divorce situation, but my mother would have shot me if I would have had a baby out of wedlock. we have a fundamental issue, and it's not just Louisiana, it's the country, but it hits us hard because we have so many poor people having babies, continuing the poverty cycle.
Well, I think at one time you saw the welfare system encouraging that, but that is not the situation any longer. Now, you know, we fight abortion and we try to encourage life, and then when these young women actually follow up on that suggestion, you know, we end up having a whole lot of babies out there. So you know, we're torn with our asking people to be a little more moral when things aren't exactly the way they come out, you know, or we figure they're going to come out. And then, you know, we've got a lot of children out there to take care of. And indeed, Louisiana has so many children in poverty, you know, and that's the way I like to look at it, because that's the reality. You've got more children living in poverty in Louisiana than in most states. So that gives us the problem. But poverty is the core problem to all of the other issues in Louisiana. And we had a poverty summit in Monroe last December. Universally, people had met in, I think some 18 regions of the state, or communities in the state, and people from all regions, over 2,000 people came in to talk about the core issues. And in the end, the common denominator they really realized was the lack of proper education and proper training for whomever and however you come into this world, under whatever circumstances you find yourself. If it's a result of single parenthood, or as in the case of Ms. Hebert, you know, in a divorce, you've got a lot of single parenthood out there, and you've got a lot of children who are suffering. So we have to do the very best that we can with the children as we find them, and then try to break the cycles. There's a misconception about the welfare situation. A few years ago, President Clinton actually revised the federal laws, and you have a lifetime limit now of how long you can be on welfare. And in Louisiana, you actually get dropped off after 2 years if you're not in a program that's giving you more education and more training to get you strong and to enable you to get into the workforce.
Let me hear from our other panelists. Mr. Secretary?
Well, I think, of course, you know, we can talk about the problem a lot. We could point out, I guess, a number of factors that contribute to the problem. But I think the best solution, really, to break that cycle and to alleviate the effects of poverty is to help lead those families and those individuals down a path of independence and self-sufficiency. And what better way to do that than to give someone some opportunity? Of course, education is critical, but for those who find themselves in those situations today, and many of whom are in situations are poor because really through no fault of their own. Layoffs, plant layoffs. I heard Ms. Hebert speak earlier tonight about a personal family situation that put her there. But we can actually provide opportunities through job training. Our department offers a full range of employment services and job training services. I'm not sure how many of those you are even aware of, Ms. Hebert, but we make those services available to our citizens really as a way of helping them help themselves. And I really think that that's the key. And I can talk more specifically about any of those services during the segment.
Ms. Bourg?
Well, I've worked alongside poor folks all over the state in rural areas. I guess I'm in my 4th decade now, and I ain't hardly met any folks who are lazy who are poor. In fact, it's just the opposite what I see, Bessie. And a mother and a mother with children may have gotten into a situation that has nothing to do with her control, as we heard earlier. And so think about it. If a mother is working to support her children at minimum wage, it takes 2 40-hour-week jobs to get somewhere, not even at the self-sufficiency level, just above the poverty line. But she got there some kind of way, and her husband could have died. So I believe it's what you said. We have to take the families where we find them for the decisions that have happened in life. And we need to make sure that when a family works in the good old American tradition, that what happens is they get paid for their work and their children get insured. And I want to congratulate the governor for saying, gee, you know, if you're a company and a responsible company in this state and you're getting tax, you know, rebates, or you're getting tax empowerment zone monies from the common pot, that's our good Louisiana tax dollars, then we don't want to have to pick up some more tax dollars to pay for the insurance for your employees. You need to insure them. And I want to congratulate you. I think that's a courageous position on that.
Does that answer your question? Are you satisfied?
Not
Betsy?
particularly, no.
Why not?
Well, because I still think that there are fundamental issues with young women and with young men that are unrelated to any of that, that women have babies because they feel needy and unloved, and they get pregnant because they think if they have a baby, that baby's going to love them. It begins a cycle of that is their child, and look, and I don't think people are lazy. I didn't say that. That was not my point. My point is when you have a single parent having a baby, you are way off to a bad start on making a decent income, because you can't, you know, if you don't have education, how do you get the education? Who takes care of the baby when you go to work?
Mary, you had a point.
I think there are two very strong issues that I'd like to hear your comments about. First of all is parent apathy. Being in education for 20 years and now at the high school level, I do see a huge number of high school students who basically have no interest in being at school, much like what Tommy was talking about earlier. There are a lot of educators who are working very hard to help students understand that if they complete that education, that is truly a window for opportunity. However, they're coming from home situations that are not stressing those same moral issues, education value.
So what's your question, Mary? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I think we have to, I'd like to hear what we're doing. I don't think we can have one answer. I think we need to look at it in different segments. At preschool level, I would like to see the state do more to pull children out of those homes in poverty from 7 to 7 in an after-school program, before-school program, where we literally train parents. So I'd also like to hear your comments about holding parents accountable. If a child doesn't come to school, if a child doesn't do homework,
all right, you've got a bunch there. Let's let the governor answer.
Well, those are a lot of very powerful questions, and it's something that is oftentimes very easy to talk about, but very difficult and expensive to implement. But we have begun that process. Louisiana has instituted a pre-K program for the at-risk 3 and 4-year-olds who come out of homes. At risk means that they're not earning at the same levels, and so those children are less likely to have exposure to opportunities that middle-income families offer naturally. So we've got several thousands of these very young children in our pre-K programs now. We have several thousand more that we have to provide the monies for. It just costs many millions to do one little aspect of what you have described in a long list of things. But we are encouraging our schools to be innovative and to go forth in creative ways. We've got a study group that's looking at the redesign of high schools right now for the very reasons that I heard talked about, where some young people just, no matter how hard the parents try to inspire them or to get that wake-up call to happen in their heads, feel so hopeless and helpless when they see their children just languishing day after day and week after week and so on. But I think that for some kids, high school's very, very difficult, and they don't see the correlation, and it doesn't click with them quickly enough. And so we're actually looking at a redesign of high schools. We're asking, we're going to be, I'm talking about this in a very preliminary state because none of this is particularly official yet. We've not figured out exactly how we can implement it and where it needs to be implemented or anything like that. But I want you to know what we're talking about. We're talking about perhaps technical high schools that offer technical training. And sometimes if you get a child out of the academic world that we certainly demand of them, and you and not get them out completely, but you keep them in their English and math classes. You have to have language skills, and you have to be able to play with numbers at some basic levels. But show them, demonstrate to them with some training in some particular avenue that that is more than just academic. So they see the application. And once they see if it's something that they enjoy learning about, they'll see what they need to be doing in the classroom, in the formal classroom setting. So we're talking about all these things because we're losing too many children right now out of the school system. Even if a 16-year-old is in the 8th grade, they're bouncing out. So, we're looking at ways of doing schooling differently.
I want to get into adult illiteracy problems because it's a real problem, especially in the city of New Orleans. But let me hear from a couple other people. Secretary, Ms. Bourg, if you want to jump in, That's the way we do things here.
I would like to jump in a little bit there. Of course, we can talk about parental responsibility and accountability, and this argument, this whole discussion about anti-poverty and fighting poverty is been going on a long time. I don't know, since about
mid-60s.
Mid-60s, with President Johnson's programs. And we find ourselves today looking at a Louisiana that still has a tremendously high school dropout rate. Well, that's unconscionable. I mean, in spite of all the federal money, the public dollars that have gone into the anti-poverty programs, we still have a state that has 9th graders dropping out, 8th graders, dropping out, just not entering high school. Well, I think the governor hit it right on the head. We've got to really start at the pre-K level.
One of the things I noticed, though, if I don't mean to interrupt, but one of the things I noticed about the Poverty Summit that came out of it was that the state has never had a game plan, never had a plan of attack. Kelly, does that, all of this, are you hearing anything new in all of this?
Not anything new.
So what's your impression? I mean, you're hearing...
I think that probably a lot of these people that are earning minimum wage, that are dropouts, whatever, they don't know how to get to the help that the state provides. They may not even know it exists. Myself, I would go to the internet, but a lot of people don't even know, they don't have basic computer skills.
So what's your question?
So I don't know. My question:
That's a great point.
How are we going to get this message out? And I don't necessarily believe it is the state's job.
Thank you. That's exactly where I'm coming from. That it's really not just the state of Louisiana and government's job. It really takes all the sectors of our community and our economy. And I kind of look at it like a three-legged stool, if you will. You have government, and you have the business sector, and you have the non-for-profit sector, where a lot of innovation comes. And any one of those legs missing, and it's going to topple over. And it takes, I think you're right, it takes innovation. So it's about hope, because if you don't understand the connection between what you're learning and how you're going to become self-sufficient and earn a living, it's not going to work. You're not going to learn it. So it's about creating that hope and making things really work. And I think it's about innovation, and we tried to do that at Southern Mutual Help Association, where we brought together a coalition of about 8 banks, and we brought together the poor folks themselves, poor families themselves, to help design some of the answers. And we put together some money from the government. We blended it, and every year millions and millions of dollars are going out to families to become homeowners, where they're beginning to grow their assets and get into the mainstream economy. And I think it takes that kind of creativity, innovation, and partnership if we're going to do it in Louisiana.
What if you allowed, you can measure monetary means for tax deductions. There are a lot of people that only have one person earning income, and either the mom is at home or the wife is at home. What if we measured time as a monetary figure, and you got a tax deduction for the amount of time you put in?
Okay, go.
as volunteer.
Kelly, there is a program out there that a lot of Louisiana people are not using. Low-income people have the right to receive the Earned Income Tax Credit. And a family that earns, a family of 4, I think, that earns as much as $32,000 and a little bit, can get money back simply by filing their income taxes and making the and applying for it. We've got I think there's a maximum of about $4,000 a year that a family that is under earning can actually be eligible for, depending on your income. What I think when Lorna was talking about getting them to be property owners, homeowners, a lot of times they'll go splurge when they get that money because they've been so oppressed. You can understand. It's like pent-up need, and they just want to have some financial relief, and it's short-lived. But wise families, or families that are guided wisely, could even take that money over a period of a few years and save up for a new home of their own. You know, and so there are possibilities there that perhaps we haven't talked to enough people about.
And that brings me to the point of popular education. I think what we have focused on, and I think it's baseline job training and education through our institutions, but I think in partnership with business and community development corporations that are dedicated to ending poverty, not just servicing it, I think we can have a whole new popular education approach that gets this information out to the folks in the state that really need to make use of it.
Perry's got a point over here. Perry, you have a question?
Yes, on the redesign of the high school curriculum and on the training programs that y'all have, how closely do you work with potential employers, the other corporations in the state, to make sure that you're creating real opportunities for these kids if they do sign up for these programs?
Very closely. In fact, we have our local offices actually have people in place. We've got business services representatives. We've got employees who are strategically located regionally, who respond directly to layoffs and plant closings. But we are constantly in touch with the business community, talking to them, finding out what their needs are.
If you're talking about education redesign, then
We think we can do everything we do better. Because we see too many people falling through the cracks, so we're not communicating adequately enough, and our job training opportunities are out there, but a lot of people don't know about it. But if they are in a company where there are massive layoffs, they learn about it because we go in as a force, you know, and everybody hears about it right up front. So when you have a massive layoff where you have a critical mass of people, they are well taken care of. But I guess it's the isolated individual out there who's toiling in a hopeless situation, not knowing how to get themselves into a better place, that I believe that we haven't done a good enough job at the state level, and we want to work toward that.
I want to hear from some other people, and we're rapidly running out of time, believe it or not. Let's start back with the Reverend.
Yes, I would like to ask the question about homelessness. We've not said much on the issue of homelessness. I'd like to ask the governor, what is the governor's office vision in terms of working with faith-based entities? One of the things that in the greater New Orleans community, a lot of the children are faced with disadvantages because they're homeless and they're not allowed into the school system. I'd like to thank the Energy Corporation. And
Pastor, we're running out of time. Could you come to a question, sir?
What we would like to do is we would like to ask, what is the vision specifically relating to homeless persons as it relates to the governor's office?
Well, we are definitely working through faith-based organizations. As it's been said already, all of us have to work at this. This is not something, we can't create more government programs. Frankly, poverty is a very expensive proposition. It is more than we can afford. Mm-hmm. And so we can't just keep creating government programs. We've got a huge network in place. What we're trying to do is get the people who are out there who need to access the network to know it's there, and then to get into it and to get into the programs that will give them their ticket to freedom. The homeless situation is massive in some regions of the state, but you know we do depend on churches to help us out, to identify ways, and I think Lorna could speak to that
Governor,
very well.
It really is about the will of a people, of a nation, and of a state, because the single largest housing program in America is the program of the mortgage interest tax deduction, which is $90 billion a year. And even H&R Block says that the persons that benefit from that have a $170,000 home or larger. So that was a tax tweaking of the code, wasn't it? So we need to look as a country and as a state, how do we spend our common pot tax dollars? And can we get rid of, end structural poverty and not just keep servicing it?
We're out of time, folks. Thank you very much for your participation tonight. Thank the governor for being with us. Mr. Secretary, Ms. Bourg, thank you for being with us. And we'll be back. Beth, Courtney, and I will be back with a few final thoughts right after this. I think what we heard tonight was an interesting discussion, particularly on 2 points. I mean, we repeated that there has never been a game plan in Louisiana, and the governor had a very pithy but pointed quote about poverty is expensive.
Well, absolutely, but as somebody said, we just scratched the surface. This is a topic we could talk about a long time because it has many complexities to it, and just finding out the programs that exist for citizens of Louisiana is something that maybe we should be working on as well.
Indeed, it touches so many things: healthcare, education, crime. And we didn't even touch on crime tonight, but poverty directly impacts street crime, for instance, all over the state.
Well, that wraps up the Public Square for this month.
Next month on Public Square, just in time for the excesses of Mardi Gras and the penance of Lent, we'll look at Louisiana lifestyles and ask the question, is the good life killing us?
Well, I don't know about you, Charles.
No, I'm sucking it in. I'm not...
Until then, I'm Beth Courtney for Charles Zewe and Louisiana Public Square. Good night.
For more information on tonight's topic, visit our website at lpb.org. A home video of this program is available. For more information, call 1-800-973-7246 or write to the address on your screen.
We power hope. We power dreams. We power life. But there's one power we all have. The power to make a difference. The power to vote. Entergy, the power of people.